Scott does a lot of DP work. He's actually going to start breaking down what goes into the components and things of that nature with a RED camera and how these types of cameras, why you're paying the certain money that you are to get those certain benefits and all those stuff.
What is up, Merce Nation? Javier Mercedes here, and I'm a curious individual, especially when it comes to video tech and cameras. And I've grown up in the videography business using prosumer cameras like the Canon 7D, the Sony RX4, and now I have the Sony a7 III. But I wanted to sit down with somebody that has those really expensive cameras. I'm talking about the RED and the ARRI cameras of the world, the things that make motion picture videos. And since I've never used a RED or an ARRI camera before, I feel like I have a lot of questions that a lot of other YouTubers and content creators probably have. So if you guys are interested in that kind of material, I have a series of these videos coming out where I just sit down with people that use these cameras on a day-to-day basis, and I ask them questions that I think other people would be interested to hear about these more expensive pieces of video equipment.
This is a RED Epic W, one of, I think, probably now like 6 or 7 different models in their lineup currently. It shoots 8K, which is a lot of Ks. Yeah. Probably too many Ks, but that's what it does, so that's what I do. One of the nice things about this camera, you can see it's pretty modular. If you look around the body of the camera, you can see you can build it a lot of different ways. So for instance, if I wanted to strip it down so I could put it on a gimbal, I'd take the top handle off here. I could take this handle off, strip the whole thing down quite a bit, park the monitor just on top here. I can pull this handle back here off entirely and basically just make it into a tiny little cube. But if you want to have like a more cinema style production and you need accessories, it's easy to just put them where you need them. Another one of the things that RED is famous for, aside from all the Ks, is the RAW ability, right? And so like you think about a photograph, you take like JPEG and RAW on your 5D or whatever you're shooting, you know, still photos with. Same idea with the footage on this. So you can see across the top here, a whole bunch of settings, and these are largely changeable after the fact.
This would be the equivalent of, like you were saying, RAW. So
Exactly.
so when if you were in Lightroom, and for photographers, if you're familiar with taking photos, the best thing about going and taking JPEG versus RAW is that like you get everything. Like in dynamic range, you get everything. There's so much information there.
Exactly. Yeah, and so you can take stuff that you've already shot and change settings from when you shot it. So I'll give you an example. Here's this dude. He's in a bathroom stall, looking like he's fluorescent. But if for whatever reason you wanted to make that, let's say, darker and colder, you've got this whole range of settings here, and you can change them all on the fly. So here
And that's
he
not
is.
while you're filming. That's just after.
This is
the fact.
afterwards, yeah. So it's it gives you a lot of flexibility that you don't have with most other cameras. So if you're just running and gunning and you didn't have time to set your white balance right, it's a little bit of a pain, but you can fix that. It's not a big deal. One of the complaints previously about these cameras was, okay, well, it shoots RAW, but that's too much for me. I don't want these big 8K files. You know, my computer just chokes on them when I'm trying to edit stuff, and it's ridiculous. You used to have to like transcode them into ProRes, whatever, or
And do
you know,
proxies and whatnot.
exactly. The nice thing about this camera is now it will shoot proxies side by side with the 8K files.
If you've ever worked in a proxy type of situation, it's a smaller res file. It's just a stand-in. It's like a replacement file. So you edit with a very low res, whatever. Most of the time it's ProRes just because that's a good codec. And you do all of your different trinkets and doodads and settings in that in your edit, and it plays back fine. But then when you go to export it, it uses the master awesome file. That's a real term, awesome file. It's not RED with a little backwards 3. It's awesome file. So with something like the FS7, when you're shooting stuff, you can use things like log to get around dynamic range and all that. But part of that problem is it just takes more time in post-processing. So you have to do more work to color things and do all that stuff. And not only that, but when you're trying to show clients material, there's like if you show them something that's in log, it's gonna look really dull. But this camera, you can use stuff in the viewfinder to make it look with a LUT. You can put like a Rec 709 and other stuff like that. So it looks kind of like what it will look like in the future. What else?
It has a lot of high frame rate options like this one does. You get some options with the format here. So you got 8K, but if you don't want to shoot 8K for whatever reason, you can go 7K, 6K, whatever you like. And the reason I bring that up with frame rates is because when you're shooting 6Ks at a time, there are going to be limits to how fast you can shoot frame
How
rates.
many frames? Yeah.
Exactly. You have to, if you want to go higher speed, you have to crop in on the sensor to do it. You might have to go all the way down to 4K to shoot 120.
You might have to.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Slumming it in 4K.
Oh, I can't believe you.
But the thing is, even though it sounds like, okay, well, yeah, it's still 4K, if you're taking a sensor that's this big and you're only shooting a window of it that's about that big, you know, there's like an obvious quality difference there.
The other thing I was going to say is this is meant, I believe, is more to be like the run and guns, like heavenly godsend, because it has all the things that you would need to get that smooth, silky slow-mo at 180 frames per second, but it's not going to be recording sound at that time. It has the other components to actually get the sound and everything with it. Now with something with a red, you have to get tapped, don't you?
Yeah, there's a, you can see back here, there's like an audio port if you want it. But it's like an 1/8 inch jack. It's not designed for this type of thing. You can tell that this camera is not meant to be, it's not designed to do the same things as the FS7.
Yeah, for sure.
They're clearly like meant to do different stuff, although they both get used for both things.
Yeah.
You know, they specialize in different things.
That one's like strictly visual. When you have sound, how do you sync sound with something like this?
In an ideal world, if you're in a cinema setting, again, you have a sound person, and probably what they will do for you in most cases is give you a hop or maybe an IFB, which are basically just little boxes that send what the audio mixer is recording at the time, sends it to your camera, so it's the same track. It's not going to be the same quality as what they're getting, but it at least is a consistent reference with their sound. In an even better world, you're also getting timecode. You can see back here, there's a couple ports on the camera that look the same. One of them is called a sync port, and there's a tiny 4-pin LEMO cable. It looks like a smaller version of this cable right here. That would come from the sound. There would either be like a box that he parks on the camera, or he might do what they just call is jam it and stick it once and then see that it has synced the clock and the camera to his clock and then pull it out, and then he doesn't have to touch it for a while because the clock should stay in sync.
What he's talking about with jam syncing timecode is that's with each take though, correct?
So not with each take, but with reds, they've gotten better, but traditionally
there's lag,
you would
there?
They don't keep time as well as a lot of other cameras. So the traditional process has been, at least in my experience, is at minimum you probably jam twice, 2 or 3 times a day. You would probably, if you could, jam whenever you change batteries. So if the camera powers down and then powers back up, it would be nice to be able to jam in that circumstance.
Does the time code keep running when the battery has been removed?
Yeah, it has a small internal battery that will keep the clock going all the time. So like I said, they've made some improvements. It keeps time better than the older models did, but you still want to jam it with any camera, even this one. You want to jam it at least probably a couple of times during the day to make sure that it's close.
I came from an audio background, and the reason I bring this up is because it is a big thing to talk about. Syncing audio to video is like, it's so huge, and being a post editor, it could take you a whole day to do a whole shoot, and all of that could be remedied by time code going into a camera. Now this camera right here doesn't have that input. What you can do is you can buy for another $2,000 is this V-mount is not the Sony V-mount. V-mount is strictly for providing power to this camera. It's great for doing its job. But if you were to get Sony's V-mount, that has the components to put timecode into it for syncing. And then also it gives you the capability to shoot ProRes and other things like that, which gives you more bit depth and all that business. Doing timecode on a set, just the editor and me, please, if anybody's watching this, just do that. Just do it, please, because nothing's worse than, especially on a red camera, you do all that slow-mo and you get maybe 2 days worth of documentary footage, and the sound guy did his thing. You guys did the clapper and everything, but it's still going to take you like a day and a half to 2 days to sync all that if you don't have at least reference noise, reference something in there.
Scratch track.
Yeah, scratch track. And then obviously, like he was saying, in the best world, putting timecode in there, because when you go into something like Premiere, all you got to do is drop those things in, and then there's this little checkbox that pops up, and it says, "Do you want to sync to timecode?" And then you hit it, and then literally your life is so much better. That's all I have to say about that until I have to say more about it. Can you talk about too? I don't know if this relates to frame rates and all that, but these are customizable cameras. Like you said, there was a helium sensor. What does that mean? And like. Sure. And does that affect what you can record with the camera, the body itself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with that and then work backwards. So as Javier just mentioned, this is a helium sensor camera, and so if I were to pull this lens off, you'll be able to see it. You can see inside there, kind of, if there's light. Yeah. There's a sensor inside there. That's the helium sensor. But Red makes, like I said, a whole line of different sensors for these cameras. And they actually did just start a sensor swap program. So you would have the same body, but you could send it in to them, and they will trade out the 8K helium sensor with, say, the new 5K Gemini sensor, which is like their new super low light one. Lower res, but better low light performance. So it changes a few things when you swap a sensor in one of these. Obviously, if you went to a 5K one, there are fewer individual pixels for the computer to have to process. So you get better frame rates using the whole sensor. And speaking of that, your frame rates are dependent on the resolution that you're shooting. So if we wanted to see the fastest this thing could go, if I drop it down into 2K, it is essentially 1080p.
That's 2K?
2K it's just slightly larger than 1080p. Okay. So this is a 15 to 30 lens that I have on here. So at a 15 mil, if you can see the distance from here to here, this 15 mil lens, when I crop into 2K, it's only seeing the lens in front of the camera.
That's crazy.
It's very tight. So that's what I'm talking about when I say you're windowing in quite a bit. But when you window in that much, my frame rate options kind of just go off the wall. So now we could shoot 240 at that.
That's awesome.
And but again, you're shooting a tiny little 240 window.
Because sometimes that's what you really need.
Yeah. I mean, specialty shots I've seen, I want to say it was like honeybees or something that someone shot all in 2 and 3K, like the higher frame rate. And it looks awesome. Just use the right lenses, and
I'm assuming you have to get really wide.
Yeah.
Or something like that. One
of the things about shooting an 8K sensor is, even if the lens that you're shooting on is not perfect, you're not on a master prime, at 8K, when things are scaled down to 1080, like most people are viewing at home, even like a not that great lens is probably still going to look pretty good when you take 8K images from it and throw it into a 1080p window. Whereas if you're shooting on a smaller area of the sensor, all those little flaws start to show up. So the lens that you use matters a lot more when you crop in like that.
That concludes part 1 with Scott Clark DP talking about this Red camera. If you are interested in following up on this series, click the video on the screen if it has been released.